And welcome back, everybody. This is your Maya Sensei speaking. I'd like to show you guys today some techniques on how to sculpt some cloth, and I'll also show you guys how I would address some smaller details like noise level details through the noise maker or the surface noise function. And then once we've covered those, I'm going to ease into a next video where you guys will be watching a time lapse of me going through the process of applying these techniques to the rest of the assets within uh, the actual low poly modeling for game assets. Right, let's get started. What I have here in front of me is just a simple polygon plane. And usually when I draw out a simple polygon plane from, the ZBrush interface over here, we can choose polyplane 3D, or even going and importing an OBJ through the import menu function. There's a few things that I like to set up first. The first thing I want to do is turn on wireframe, so Shift F is a hotkey for that. You can see my layout. I can see the wireframe. And the other thing that I like to do additionally is making sure that under my display options that I have double-sided checked. What this will ensure is that we can actually see the backside faces, and that's going to help a lot with the actual sculpting of this mesh. If you want to do quick checks on what's happening behind the object, if you don't have double on, it's going to render the object as basic transparent or invisible, and that's definitely not what I'm looking for. So once I have this set up, I'm going to go quickly and bring up some references. On the other screen, I'll bring up a reference sheet here. I'm going to grab my reference and we're going to load that up. So I like to use a little application that allows me to draw these or render these images on screen, and this is called PureRef. It's a really, really nice little application. I'm just waiting for my computer to respond here. So this is the image that we're going to use for the most part to draw our reference from. And so I'm just going to open up this image inside of PureRef. So I'm going to launch PureRef. And once that is launched, I'm going to place this object inside of the PureRef folder. So I'm going to drag PureRef here in front of us, and I'm going to drag my reference right into here. Just drag and drop it in there. And right, so we've got the reference loaded in, and then I'm just going to shrink this window down and just kind of place it off to the side that we can use that for our reference guide. So once I have that set up more or less where I want it to be, I've set up this window so it is always on top, which means even if I'm moving inside of ZBrush, it will still allow me to navigate and the image won't disappear. Great stuff. So a few key things that I like to address is that we need to make sure that based off of the reference, you're always going to have certain tension lines or parts that's going to hold the mass or the weight of the object. And then based off the thickness of the cloth, it's going to give you certain types of folds and wrinkles according to that. So we're going to simplify this quite a bit. We're not going to do as much detail in this cloth piece, but I'm going to show you guys the basic workflow that I like to use whenever I am sculpting something like this type of cloth. So we've got the flat polygon plane in front of us. I'm going to use a certain set of brushes. I'll talk about them as we go through this process. And so let's get started. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to work at the lower subdivision as much as I can so I can try and gain the big silhouette shapes first, and then progressively start adding more detail using the subdivisions. So I'm going to use a masking technique. So for instance, if I hold down Control, I can drag out a mask, and that's going to mask out the faces for us. Another way is to just control and click directly on the mesh. In fact, this one is asking me to make it a polymesh 3D, so I'm going to say make polymesh 3D, and then we can go and mask it out. You can turn the wireframe on if you want to see it, or we can hide that if we're done by Shift F. Okay, so I'm going to start blocking out the major kind of curve profiles. So let's see this whole section over here. Mask out, and then try and go right up to that corner. And as soon as you drag it from outside, it's going to give you that bounding box. If you want to change the way the drag mask function works, we can go into the mask pen, and we can just change, bring this reference down a bit, and we can just change that to mask lasso. It's going to ask you, would you like to override this? When you hit the control key, that's perfectly fine. We're going to hit OK. And now, when we do that, just need to make sure I'm set to lasso. For some reason, still bugging out here. Let's have a look. There we go. So sorry about that. So I'm just setting this back to the regular mask pen mode, and then under the stroke I'm going to make sure I set that to lasso, and that will allow me to then click and drag and then mask using the pen lasso function. Right, so I've got something basic enough for what I want to work with. And then what I'm going to do is you can hold down control and tap once or twice on the mesh, and that's going to start blurring out the mask for us. I'm also going to reverse the mask by holding down control and tapping outside, and that will just inverse the mask for us. If you want to clear the mask, you can hold down control, click and drag out here, and that will just get you to a clean, clear, unmasked object where we can work from scratch again. So back again, undo that. I'm going to jump to the move brush. You can find the move brush under B, and then M for move, and then V. And there we have it. So I'm going to hold down S to increase the brush size. Sorry, I'm going to tap S, and then I'm going to click on the slider and then choose the size of the brush that I want to work with. So what I'm trying to do here is trying to pull the polygons around so that I can create the illusion of weight kind of sagging down, but also at the same time make it feel like the cloth is folding backwards into itself. So something like that could work. You can also hold on control and tap again. You can see there's a bit of a sharp angle that's occurring there, so I'm holding down shift and I'm just brushing along that, and that will blend, or use the smooth brush to blend those polygons together. So again, I'm going to clear out the mask, and then what we're going to do now is I'm going to jump to standard brush, so B, S for standard, and then T, and that will give us the standard brush. And what I'm trying to do now is add polygons by pushing the faces up towards the top. And I'm doing it quite rough and quite broad, just to kind of give that impression of height pushing forward instead of just the faces pushing backwards. We want to have a nice depth balance between those two. Just kind of slowly building that up over there. You can see as it kind of goes up to that corner, we want to try and sharpen the transition. Now I'm not going to be able to do too much of that because of the limiting amount of polygons. So I'm going to leave it like that, and then we'll start seeing a secondary shape occurring in there as well. So what I'm going to do is mask out this part, coming back again, and then over and up again. So those lines. Maybe take away some of this. And then control, click again to invert the mask. And then again back to the move brush, BMV. Okay, so same process, just repeating that multiple times. I'm going to blur the mask a little bit. And I'm going to start pulling some of these polygons back. Just to emphasize this top profile. You can hold down Control in the move brush, Alt, and then that will allow us to push and pull these polygons along their face normals. So that's going to give us a nice alternative way of, instead of rotating the canvas and then pulling towards the back or the front, as you've guys seen there. Right, so you'll see my smooth brush is actually quite strong, so if I hold down Shift and I drag over this, it will flatten out your model quite a lot. And I have set up my UI to be slightly more of a unique UI. So to have access to that function that I'm talking about, you'll have to go to, I think it is Draw, and then you'll see there's our Z intensity. So if I hold down Shift, you can see this is the smooth brush modifier, and the Z intensity for that is 100%. So I'm going to drop that down. Alternatively, you can hold down spacebar, and then you can choose the Z intensity as you like to edit it from there. Okay, so now that I have that changed, when I use the smooth brush now, it's not nearly as intense, and I have a little bit more control over the way I'm smoothing that out. So I'm going to jump back to the brush standard and slowly kind of work my way by adding more polygons down here, or rather volume in the polygons, not necessarily adding more polygons. And so we're just gradually kind of building this up. So on the one side, it seems like it's got a very sharp point here, so we won't be able to do that right now as we don't have enough polygons. But I'm just trying to get the major mass down first. And it's got a little bit of a smooth curvature here. It's got a smooth curvature there, but the fall off down there is also quite nice and blended. Okay, so what we're trying to do is have the mass of the weight kind of make it feel like it's pulling from these points, and because it's being held down by some sort of a pin, the cloth mass and the weight is drawing down in the center, creating this V shape and giving us the effect that we want. So now looking at this model, you'll also see if you pull these polygons too much, you have to start thinking about how this is looking from other angles. So I like to jump to the move brush and then just very subtly make sure that it's got the same clean curve profile along those lines. When you look over here, same kind of thing. You want to bring that up along those lines. A little bit there. Just trying to make it nice and even. And that will ensure when we subdivide this mesh that it maintains the correct volume. Otherwise, we're going to have a lot of wobbly lines very quickly. Okay, so we're now hitting a point where we can't really do much with the existing amount of polygons. So we're going to have to start forcing more polygons into the mesh to be able to capture the definition that we want. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold down Control and then tap D once, and that's going to put us with double the amount of polygons. We're now on 4,225 active points or faces, and then we can work from there. So it's still not a lot of polygons, but it's enough that we can still refine these shapes a little bit more. So I'm going to start jumping into my standard brush and maybe assigning some sort of a soft alpha, like one of these guys over here. And that's just going to help sharpen up the way that this brush reacts to the stroke. I'm going to maybe make this a little bit more enhanced by using a sharper pointy tip, and that's going to help quite a bit. So over here we want to bring this down, something like this. And again, I'm jumping between the smooth brush and the standard brush by holding down shift or letting go of shift. Just gradually kind of maintain that continuous build up of the volume. This process is just repeated over and over and over until we have the final model. Right, so the next phase I'm adding another set of polygons by adding another subdivision, and we're getting to the point where we can really start kind of finessing certain angles and enhance the way that the cloth folds around certain angles. At this point, I will reevaluate whether some of the planes are still in there, whether it needs to be more flattened or a little bit more rounded out. And then based off of that, I would then go and start using other brushes. So one brush in particular is going to be the Trim Dynamic. This one really helps to planar out specific angles. So it just samples the normals and really helps with making sure that you can keep those structures in your mesh. So I'm going to do a little bit of that in some areas. Over here it feels like it's too soft. It needs to be more of a sharper corner. So I'm going to jump back to my standard brush with that sharp alpha. And then I'm going to start cutting right into there as well. The center line is going to fold out a little bit, like such. Almost like the cloth is buckling in the middle because of the weight. And I'm going to change that to 0 alpha and then reduce my brush strength down to about 2 or 3 and just very gradually kind of build up the volume to kind of give it a more of a softer and rounder shape. And by this time, we have enough polygons that the smooth brush is acting very subtle. The more subdivisions you have, the less the smooth brush has an effect on the polygons, because the brush has been set earlier to have a much lower intensity. So just keep that in mind. I'm going to make sure that's a little bit sharper in there. Brush intensity. Really trying to cut in there. save this, a quick save, and once again, I'm going to continue trying to carve a little bit more into the mesh. At every subdivision, I'm really trying to push the polygons as much as I can to get as much detail from that level of division. This will ensure that I always get the best result that the subdivision allows me to without adding unnecessary polygons too quickly and then being overburdened by too many details and not focusing on the overall silhouette. So the next thing that I want to do here, I just want to change my standard brush to have a lazy mouse function. So I'm going to turn that on. I'm going to increase the radius. I'm going to drop the lazy stepping. And what this will allow me to do is have a little tail that tags along my brush. And then where that brush stroke continues, that's where the brush actually intersects in the mesh instead of directly on the actual mouse cursor. What this will allow me to do is more accurately and very evenly place my stroke and give a really nice clean result instead of having wobbly lines. Okay, so if we look here, there's a lot of roundness happening at the bottom. If we look there, there's a very sharp transition in the shadow. So we want to try and emphasize that a little bit more. And then we're going to go back with the brushes afterwards and emphasize the planarity of the stroke by using the trim dynamic brush. That's a little bit better. So I'm going to jump to my brush B, T for trim, and then D for dynamic. And then I'm just going to start planaring out some of these angles. And that will just ensure that we don't have too much of a concave volume in these areas that's actually bulging out. I'm also combining that with a bit of a smooth stroke. And you can see over here, there's still a little roundness happening there. And if you see that it's a little bit too difficult for you to try and work with the polygons as they are, you can always go down to a lower subdivision by holding down Shift D, Shift and then D, and then using your move brush, BMV, to then try and pull these polygons out a bit more. That's a bit better. It's bending out a lot more, which is exactly what we want. You always want to try and make those angles and those planes nice and clean. Down here, there's also almost like a line running through there. And then we have a plane going this way and another plane going that way. So I'm going to jump to the brush trim dynamic and try and flatten some of those angles a little bit more. Same thing on this side. And on the outside, it needs to be a little bit rounder. So that's looking good. Okay. That's much better. Right, back to that higher subdivision. And just keep working the shape. Trim this area. Both the inside as well as the outside, just a bit. And then it needs to be softer as it goes to the top. Right. Outside I'm also going to add a little bit of a plane. And back with a bit of a brush standard. And just enhance some of these details. So I'm getting too much of a sharp line. So what I'm going to do is just jump again to one of these softer alphas. That's a bit better. Maybe a larger one, like this one. And then just make my brush nice and big. And then bring my brush intensity down again to like 3 or 4. And this will allow me to very broadly add volume to my shapes. Okay. I might overdo it, and then I can use the trim dynamic just to refine those shapes once again. So I feel like this again needs a little bit more enhancement through some sort of a masking method. So I can easily just mask out a section, invert the mask, blend it, and then really push these polygons a bit more. That feels a bit better. Can't really go beyond that at the bottom, so I'll just keep going with this, and then we can make sure we have a sharp corner as the cloth is reaching that middle section. I'm going to again increase my brush intensity. There we go. I'm going to jump back to the move brush, BMV, and if you look here, there's too many bumps going on, so I like to just kind of make sure I've got a consistent plane, even though it's gradually building up to that shape that we see here. Something like that would be nice. Again, brush trim dynamic. Spend some time cutting out these planes. This one is going back in a bit more. And there's definitely an obvious plane change on this side as well. I feel like this needs to dip in a bit more, so I'm going to go to the brush, standards, and just gradually kind of work that in as well. Alright, so it feels like this big fold is splitting up into 2 secondary folds down here. At the top, I feel like this is going too much of a curve, so I'm going to go to a lower subdivision, back to my move brush. I would then just nudge these polygons around. Quite a large broad brush. feels like these need to go a little bit more at an angle, so I'm just trying to enhance that as well. And then D, just to go back up your subdivisions. And then ZBrush tries to maintain that and make the rest of the polygons on the higher subdivisions repeat and follow that angle. Right. So I'm going to hit Control D one more time. Control D. So now we can really go and finesse certain details. Sometimes it's a good job or good idea to change to a different type of matte cap just to see how the light catches it in a different way. So I'm going to use this dark matte cap. You see there's a lot of bumps and lumps over there. Try maybe a blend material. You can see here how the light catches over here, but there's a dark shadow. That's telling me that this is not very even. So we need to do a bit of work getting that a bit nicer. So let's see. First thing that I want to do is just grab the right matte cap that's going to work for my situation. I think one of these matte cap metal ones actually work quite nice. And I'm going to go brush. This time I'm going to use the brush Damien Standard. And then this one has a really, really sharp alpha point. So I'm going to bring down the Z intensity quite a bit and just gradually kind of work these details to a point. Just got to be careful, it tends to have a bit of a pinching effect. And if that's not what you want, you just need to be careful not to make your brushes too big or too strong. It still feels like it's a bit lumpy. So I'm going to use the Damien Standard, or sorry, the Trim Dynamic. So BTD, and then I'm going to use the brush with alternative turned on, so Alt, and then that, instead of carving in, will actually build up to the face normal that we've sampled, and that's going to allow me to get these angles to be at the same depth height. I'm just going to maintain that angle a little bit nicer. Just got to be careful not to overemphasize that too much. After all, this is still cloth, so it needs to round out. Okay, I'm going to go brush, standard, change my alpha to something like a soft one, and then again with a very low Z intensity, maybe like 1, or maybe brush Z intensity 3 or 4. Maybe even without an alpha, and just build it up gradually. Okay, so if you look at how the light catches this, it's one continuous stroke. one continuous highlight, so it's going to give you a much nicer appeal. And then these inner lines down there, we need to use the brush move and then try and get these polygons to be at the same depth as well. So a lot of fine little tweaks that you should be thinking about on this high polygon subdivision level, just to ensure that your lines are as clean as you can possibly make them. So brush, then standards, BDS. So again, making sure my double is on so I can look at the back side, and then maybe pull these polygons in and we can see how much of a lumpy effect it has over there. So that's the deeper part, so we need to average that out. So it's probably a better idea to do it from the back. So brush, move, and I'm going to grab these polygons, and I'm going to try and get this line as even as I can possibly make it. If it's easier to go down one or two subdivisions, then do so. And just spend some time making that line much cleaner. Okay, that's much better. Always got to make sure that you're trying to prevent these lumpy shapes from occurring, because cloth, well, if it wrinkles, it will wrinkle in a very specific way. It's going to be more of a micro level detail, but these are more folding like details, and weight of the cloth kind of weighing it down, so we need to respect that, and it's going to apply the pressure and the weight to the cloth all evenly, so you got to take that in mind. Okay, that's much better. Just going to do a very subtle smooth on it from the back. And then we jump back to the front. We go back up to that higher subdivision. Just going to make sure that our lines have a consistent highlight across the highs and the low peaks. There is certain brushes that is designed specifically for cloth folds. I would recommend you guys actually getting those from the internet, so just look it up. That's going to help making this process a little bit easier, because the brush is already set up with the right alphas for you. You just look up ZBrush cloth alphas or ZBrush cloth brushes, and that's going to help you guys quite a bit. Okay, I'm going to stop it here. I think you guys have a general idea of my workflow when I'm creating these cloth kind of details. It's all about making the weight feel like the cloth is gathering in the corners, over here, and then making them bunch up quite nicely. And then as it kind of weighs down, it's going to start creating these V shapes. And the most important aspects that you need to consider is the height from how far it's pushing forward and then collapsing backwards. So you want to create enough silhouette change in your mesh. And then also you need to make sure that these lines are as clean as you can possibly make them, with a weighted bowing down on the outside and more of a concave volume on the inside. And then making sure your high points are all one continuous line stroke throughout that mesh. You can see over here it's still a bit lumpy, so I'd spend some time trying to address that. Right, so the next edit I want to quickly talk about is going to be making use of the surface noise function. So you will find the surface noise drop-down menu in your right hand side under the tool palette. You'll see there's the tool palette. I'm going to click on noise, and once you open this up, it will bring in the 3D model for us, and it will assign a fractal noise or some sort of a procedural noise effect to the overall of the model. And what we can do here is we can start playing with the noise scale, and we can also talk about the intensity or the strength of the actual noise. And then additionally, we can actually use this curve. Let me just increase the noise a little bit more so we can see the effect. So as we're adding or subtracting some of these points, we can start creating interesting clips out of the shape, and that's going to help quite a bit with different kinds of things like rocks and organic kind of natural degradation and so on. For our purpose, we won't be playing with that. We're just going to go and set the cloth scale for the noise down quite low, so it's a really fine kind of noise. And when we hit OK, it's going to preview on the mesh, and that's going to give us our cloth effect. Additionally, what we can do is I'm going to make sure my mesh is subdivided enough times. Let's just quickly see here. That's on level 4. I'm going to divide this again. I think I have partial hidden masked areas. I'm going to subdivide it maybe 2 more times. So it's on 1.5 million polygons. And then what I'm going to do is jump back into that noise and show you guys a slightly different thing that we can do in here as well. So at the moment it is set to just a random fractal noise. So we can actually go and load in a plugin that's part of the noise maker. If we click on the noise plugin, we can then go and choose the kind of pattern we would like to apply to the mesh. So specifically like this weave, if we click on that guy, it's going to allow us to edit that. Once we choose the different methods or different kind of styles we want to apply, we can then play with some of these internal properties, or we can just hit OK, and that's going to show us the effect of that. At the moment, the effect is very subtle, and you'll see that in the noise maker now, it makes use of the noise plugin, but at the same time, it's still using that old noise scale details. So what we need to do is we need to tell the mix to not use the original pattern at all. So we're going to put that down all the way to 0, and then we can use the plug-in scale to make this bigger or smaller. I'm going to bring this down quite a bit, and then we can increase the strength so we can get the pattern to reveal itself. You can also turn off relative just to have more of a control of how that detail is globally scaling onto the mesh. And then I'm just going to drop that scale down quite a bit. And now we can see how this texture is creating a cloth pattern. I'm going to drop the intensity or the strength of it quite a bit and bring the scale of this down even more. along these lines. And when we hit OK, it's going to preview with an interesting cloth pattern applied to the mesh. And that's generally what you can use to add some extra cloth texture. You could obviously use other alphas if you feel like it, but this one does a really good job. And I just wanted to quickly show you guys how you can preview that on your mesh, or even apply it directly to the polygons so it bakes into it. One thing that you do need to keep in mind is the result of the mesh effect being applied to it, or rather the cloth texture being applied to it, is limited to only the amount of polygons we have in the scene. So if you have very few amount of polygons, you won't be able to capture these details. So currently the noise, surface noise effect is actually previewing this more like a bump effect, bump texture. So it's not physically applied yet. It doesn't have any depth to it. So if we have only a small amount of polygons, it won't be able to capture those polygon details. So just keep that in mind whenever you're working through these workflows. And yes, enjoy that, try it out, and apply it to your workflows. Thanks for watching.